Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be covering a couple of book series that I plan to read in the future. So there's about 20 book series that I'm interested in, and I'm just going to go over each of them very briefly without too much detail. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first one is the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. This is considered by many to be his magnum opus. It's an 8-book series that started way back in the early 80s and initially concluded in 2004 with book number 7, The Dark Tower, and an 8th book was released in 2012 called The Wind Through the Keyhole, and it's basically somewhat of a side story, if you will. Now, I've already read the first 2 books, and I have reviews for those on my channel. But the reason why it's taking me so long to get through it is because, aside from also trying to make room for other authors, these books are set in Stephen King's multiverse, which means that other books outside the Dark Tower series are connected. For example, Salem's Lot, The Stand, The Eyes of the Dragon, Insomnia, It, and so on. Some of them have major connections while others have very minor ones, but still it's interesting to check out those books just to see what the connections are, even if you're not interested in the books themselves. And for those of you who don't know, this is the book series that basically got me into reading, like in general. And it's just, because of how bizarre and unconventional it is with its unique mix of Western, fantasy, sci-fi, and even horror, which is obviously Stephen King's strong suit. The first 2 books were fantastic, and I'm really excited to see how the rest of the story plays out. I've heard about the ending being very controversial, so yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I saw the movie adaptation when it came out. I liked it back then, but looking back on it now, it's just okay, I guess. I hear Mike Flanagan wants to take a shot at adapting it a second time. I think it would work well for a streaming service or as a TV show. And should we get another adaptation down the road, I hope that I'm able to at least finish the books in time. So yeah, that'll be cool. And that's the very first one, the Dark Tower series. The next one is going to be A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This fantasy series was, of course, adapted into Game of Thrones. I actually have a full playlist related to all things Game of Thrones, and I just recently did an unboxing video for my copy of the Song of Ice and Fire box set, so you can check all that out if you want to. Much like Game of Thrones itself, A Song of Ice and Fire is best known for subverting many fantasy tropes and breaking traditions. It wasn't trying to be like Lord of the Rings and all that kind of stuff, although it did take some inspiration from Frank Herbert's DUNE series. We're going to talk about that later. This series began in the 90s with the very first book, A Game of Thrones, and the 5th book, A Dance with Dragons, came out way back in 2011, sometime after the first season of Game of Thrones aired on television. And to this day, we still do not have the last 2 books, The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. But don't worry, George, take your time, because I've yet to read all of the other books first. And aside from that, there are other books that George had written which are set in this particular universe, like Fire and Blood, which is a prequel to A Song of Ice and Fire and has been adapted into House of the Dragon, a Game of Thrones prequel which is scheduled to air later this year. And regardless of how long it takes George to complete the last 2 books, I think the important thing is that he ends his series in a much better way than David Benioff and D.B. Weiss did with Game of Thrones. So yeah, I guess that's all that matters now. The next one is Jeff Lindsay's Dexter series. This is a sort of police procedural crime thriller series about a blood spatter analyst by the name of Dexter Morgan, who does his job during the day for the Miami Metro Police, and by night he's practically a serial killer who targets other serial killers. This series was of course adapted by the Showtime network into Dexter, a show that I really enjoyed despite its flaws, and I have a full playlist for that series if you want to check it out as well. So yeah, obviously being a fan of the show, I'm more than curious to check out the books at some point. The interesting thing is the fact that the show pretty much deviated from the books after season 1. That way, the network and Jeff Lindsay could go their own separate ways and just do whatever they wanted, because not all of the books had been written when the show first aired. In fact, Jeff Lindsay didn't end the series until 2 years after the show originally concluded with its 8th season. The final book was titled Dexter is Dead, and I'm more than willing to bet that fans of the character consider that to be the definitive ending for Dexter, given how everyone hated the show's ending, or its initial ending back in 2013, and most people haven't taken kindly to the ending to Dexter New Blood earlier this year, so yeah, what does that say about it? So yeah, for all of those reasons, I'm willing to check this series out in the future. It's 8 books, and there's a lot of stuff that never made it onto the show, obviously, so it'll be cool. Up next is Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. This is a 15-book series that spanned about 20 years, and I know very little about it, but from what I'm told, it's one of the best fantasy series of all time. And just the fact that it has a TV adaptation that's currently airing on Amazon Prime gives me all the more reason to give the books a shot in the future. Plus, after Robert Jordan passed away, Brandon Sanderson took over the series for the last 3 books, and in the eyes of many fans, he actually improved on the series, aside from just wrapping it up on a high note. And I mean, the series was already good to begin with, so yeah, what does that say about it? So yeah, not much to say about the Wheel of Time, but it's always piqued my curiosity, especially now that the show is out, and it's very popular among booktubers and bookstagrammers and just, you know, the book community. Next up is not really a series, but an entire author's bibliography. If I live long enough to read all of his books, of course. I'm talking about Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz has been in the game for a long time, and I've been told great things about him. He's perhaps best known for his Odd Thomas series, which is a series of mystery thriller novels. So yeah, if you're interested in Dean Koontz, there you go. He's done a couple of standalones as well, like Star Quest and Demon Seed and Chase and so on. And yeah, that's all I can really mention, because I don't know much about the guy and his work, but I get recommendations for his work quite a bit. Next up is Frank Herbert's DUNE series. Now, I'm not just talking about the 6 books that Frank Herbert wrote while he was still alive, but even the stuff that had been written afterwards by Frank's son, Brian Herbert, and Kevin J. Anderson. But most people recognize the series for the very first book, DUNE, which was so groundbreaking and is still immensely popular in the book community today, mainly for its world, its timely themes, its characters, its atmosphere, Frank Herbert's writing style, and it was so influential that it inspired the likes of A Song of Ice and Fire, Star Wars, and The Matrix. The quality of everything that came after DUNE varies, especially everything not written by Frank Herbert, since all of those books were prequels, sequels, spin-offs, and interquels set within the DUNE universe. But of course, out of curiosity, I'm still willing to check all those out. Next up, we have Chronicles of Narnia, written by C.S. Lewis. These books came out in the 1950s, and some of you may recognize the more recent film adaptations from the 2000s. This is of course the series that has the Land of Narnia, which can be accessed via the titular wardrobe in the very first book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I actually read 1 or 2 of these books growing up, but I don't remember much from them, because I always assumed they'd all be adapted into movies, but that wasn't the case. And I'm not sure what's going on with the Netflix series that's in the works, so yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Oh, and I'm fully aware that the series had a very controversial ending in the final book, an ending that's very polarizing among fans, to the point where some think it's bold and genius, while others found it to be anticlimactic and overly depressing in some ways. But I guess I'll have to see for myself what I think of it when I eventually get to these books. Coming up next is the Orphan X series, written by Greg Hurwitz. This is a sort of espionage thriller kind of thing. I only have the first book, Orphan X. I've yet to get a hold of the others. The first book involves a man who was once part of an assassin program. That past comes back to haunt him. That's kind of why I got a hold of the first one, and so I've yet to get a hold of the other ones. Then we have the Skullduggery Pleasant series by Derek Landy. So this dark fantasy series centers on Valkyrie Kane, a detective, and her mentor, Skullduggery Pleasant, as they protect the world from all types of evil forces. Meanwhile, Valkyrie struggles with the evil that rages within her. These were books that I was aware of when they first came about. You know, the covers always intrigued me. And the final book, Until the End, came out this year, so yeah, at some point I'm gonna check it out. I hear there's an adaptation in the works too, so that'll be exciting as well. Then we have the Jason Bourne series. So when it comes to the character of Jason Bourne, most people are familiar with the film adaptations, most of which starred Matt Damon as the titular character. These are of course the same movies that are best known for their achievements in shaky cam action sequences and handheld camera work. Now when it comes to the books, the original trilogy being The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Supremacy, and The Bourne Ultimatum, these 3 books were written by Robert Ludlum. This was followed up by 11 sequels, all written by Eric Van Lustbader. Then another 2 sequels by Brian Friedman, and a couple of spin-offs written by Joshua Hood, centering on another Treadstone agent by the name of Adam Hayes. Whether or not this series needed to go on for this long is up for debate, but because I'm into espionage and all that kind of stuff, especially after watching the movies and the hit TV show 24, I'm looking forward to reading this series. Next up is the Robert Langdon series by Dan Brown. This series centers on Robert Langdon, a university professor who solves mysteries and unravels conspiracies that have to do with religion, specifically Christianity and stuff like that. I have seen the movies starring Tom Hanks as Robert Langdon, and I enjoyed them to a certain extent. And I'm also aware that earlier this year, a web series based on The Lost Symbol premiered on Peacock, but it was cancelled after just 1 season, so yeah, it's not really worth mentioning. The books have garnered controversy among various religious groups. For example, the Da Vinci Code, which is book 2, revolves around the greatest cover-up in human history being the greatest story ever told, and the idea that it's been a lie the whole time. But I guess your religious beliefs won't really prevent you from reading the series and enjoying it, since it's gone on to sell about 120 million copies worldwide. I mean, I'm currently a practicing atheist at the moment, and I'm still willing to read it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully we'll get another adaptation in the future. Next up is the Alex Cross series by James Patterson. This is basically a detective fiction series, and you know, Alex Cross is pretty much the Black James Bond, if you will, and that's kind of why I'm interested in it, because I so happen to be a Bond fan myself. The series comprises of 29 novels, 2 novellas, and 2 novels focusing on Ali Cross, the son of Alex Cross. As far as adaptations go, there are 2 movies, Kiss the Girls and Along Came a Spider, starring Morgan Freeman as Alex Cross. I've only seen Along Came a Spider, and I remember enjoying that movie. As for the reboot, Alex Cross with Tyler Perry, ugh, that was terrible. And yes, I'm fully aware of James Patterson's reputation. You know, he's controversial for not really writing his own books. He hires ghostwriters and they do most of the work. And for milking his brand to death at this point, rather than focusing on the quality of his craft. I mean, much like the Jason Bourne series, it's debatable whether or not we needed this many Alex Cross books, but regardless, I'm still interested in checking it out. Coming up next is the Dresden Files, which is a series of fantasy mystery novels about a detective and wizard by the name of Harry Dresden, who investigates all types of supernatural occurrences in modern-day Chicago. The series was created by Jim Butcher, and as of today, he's written and published 17 novels in this series. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. Then we have the Percy Jackson series. Now, I became aware of this series largely due to the release of the first movie, The Lightning Thief. I still haven't seen it to this day, but from what I'm told, it's not a good adaptation of the books, and neither is its sequel, Sea of Monsters. Though there is a Disney Plus series in the works, so that'll be exciting. The main reason as to why I'm interested in giving this series a chance is because it seems to me that Rick Riordan, who created the series, intended for this to be like the next Harry Potter or something like that. I mean, it's about a young demigod by the name of Percy Jackson who has to stop Cronus and his army of titans from destroying the world. It has a lot to do with Greek mythology and stuff like that, and it spans 5 books, so count me in. Coming up next is the Shannara series by Terry Brooks. This is a high fantasy series that blends magic and primitive technology. Civilization was wiped out by a nuclear holocaust of sorts, and so the world has returned to a pre-industrial kind of state. This series spans more than 4 decades and about 32 books to be exact. It came to an end in 2020, and it was even adapted for television a few years back, but it was cancelled after 2 seasons. Now, a lot of people have criticized the original Shannara trilogy, which is the first 3 books in the series, for ripping off Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways. And I'm sure Terry Brooks himself has his detractors when it comes to, pulling a Brian Herbert and taking the series and milking it to death. He has written a bunch of other stuff aside from Shannara, but now that the series has ended, if he's going to keep at it, he needs to come up with some new ideas. Next up is the Remembrance of Earth's Past series by Liu Shichin. This is a very unique trilogy of science fiction that deals with things like solar systems and alien invasions and an Earth-like planet that is suffering from all kinds of issues. That's all I know about it, and what really caught my attention was, of course, the really cool cover art and just the basic concepts of the world. The series is available in dozens of languages, so you should pick up a copy in your language straight away. I will in the future, and there's even talks of adapting the trilogy into films, although these 2 are involved. Up next is the Artemis Fowl series by Ewan Colfer. This is a children's fantasy series about a 12-year-old named Artemis Fowl, who is a criminal mastermind of high intelligence. I became aware of this series mainly due to the poorly received film adaptation, which I haven't seen yet and I don't have any current plans to watch. But it's an interesting mix of sci-fi, fantasy, and all that kind of stuff, and I like it when authors try to combine these genres. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want to do that myself one day, who knows? So yeah, I'll be looking forward to this series. Then we have the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. This series, as we all know, was adapted into 3 video games, with the 3rd one, Wild Hunt, being the most popular one to date. I do have that game, I've played a little bit of it, and I'm really enjoying it so far. And of course, a 4th one has been announced, which is pretty cool. And let's not forget the Netflix original series starring Henry Cavill. I haven't seen it yet, and I've only played The Witcher 3. So my experience with this particular franchise is very, very limited. I've no immediate plans to read the books, but given how long ago they were written, I am interested. Up next is His Dark Materials, a fantasy trilogy by Philip Pullman. It centers on 2 children who travel to many parallel universes. It isn't your typical fantasy fare like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, as it's a little bit darker than those series and contains a lot of anti-religious themes and undertones, which of course has garnered criticism from various religious groups. There was an adaptation in the 2000s called The Golden Compass, but that movie flopped and plans for sequels were scrapped. And there's also a TV series which seems to be faring much better, as it's run for 2 seasons with a 3rd and final season set to air at some point in time. So yeah, because of all of that, I'm interested in reading the series. And last but not least, the Maze Runner series by James Dashner.
This young adult dystopian sci-fi series centers on a group of teenage boys who awaken in a place called the Glade, and beyond the Glade lies an ever-changing maze that they try to navigate and escape. Aside from the original trilogy being The Maze Runner, The Scorch Trials, and The Death Cure, there are 2 prequels, The Killing Order and Fever Code, and a novella titled Crank Palace, centered on the character of Newt. The original trilogy was adapted into 3 movies. I've only seen the first 2. I really enjoyed the first one, and I think it's one of the best young adult adaptations, considering it's a genre I kind of despise. The Scorch Trials was disappointing, however, and I've yet to see The Death Cure. So yeah, for all those reasons, I'm interested.
And that's it, guys. Those are all the book series I'm interested in for the next 20 years or so. There's a couple of other series I chose not to include, like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, Eragon, and the Mistborn series, because those aren't big priorities for me at the moment. So next time I'm gonna be looking at season 7 of Fear the Walking Dead, so look forward to that very soon. And yeah, thank you all for watching, guys. Please be sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe. Ring the bell. Be safe during this time, and I'll see you soon.